Nick Akerman, great to have you back on Mea Culpa. Great to see you, my friend. Lots to talk about. The insanity, the bullshit, the nonsense. It's not stopping. And the first thing I want to actually bring, because you have such great knowledge in this area, I want to talk to you about Chief Justice Roberts' rebuke of President Trump. I mean, Chief Justice John Roberts publicly defended Judge James Boasberg after President Trump called for his impeachment over halting certain deportation flights. Tell me, if you would, what does this rare intervention say about the independence of the judiciary under the current administration, assuming there is an even one?
Well, no, I think this has everything to do with the independence of the judiciary. I mean, I think what Roberts was getting out ahead of, he didn't want that Donald Trump had the only voice out there on this, to make it very clear that the judges are independent. As he said previously, there are no Obama judges, there are no Trump judges, they're all federal judges, and that the quality is high, that they're independent. And it's extremely important. I mean, this has been going on since Samuel Chase wasn't impeached some 200 odd years ago, where we've had an independent judiciary, which is a major, major difference between us and what you had in Weimar Germany before the Nazis took hold. There was not an independent judiciary that could hold the line. And I think that's what's really important here is that we have to recognize that there are judges that are just going to look at the law. They're not beholden to anybody. They have lifetime appointments. And as a result, their incentive is to interpret the law as they see it. And if it turns out that a particular district court judge is wrong, everyone has a right to appeal that right up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
But that's not what Trump wants. In fact, I did my own Substack this morning where I called the article that I wrote, "Roberts stands strong for his own power." I'm going to tell you what I truly believe and what I talk about in that Substack. I don't believe he did it for the rule of law. I don't believe he did it for his love of the Constitution or our democratic republic. I think he did it out of fear of losing his own power. You see, here's the thing. Assuming that Trump manages to impeach Judge Boasberg, who is appointed by the President of the United States, as are all federal judges, well, what's then to stop a president like Trump from going ahead and doing that to a sitting member of the Supreme Court, who is also nominated by the president? I think he realizes that when Trump said during the campaign that he wants to rewrite the Constitution, that he wants to divest the judiciary and the legislative branch of their co-equal powers conferred under the Constitution and confer them to just the executive branch, that he sees this as the beginning of that move. And I think this is more about preserving his own power than anything. You agree with that?
No, I guess I would disagree, and I'll tell you why. I think it's because in order to get rid of any of these judges, whether it's a Supreme Court or it's the district court judges, you need 2/3 of the Senate to basically convict on that. That has rarely ever happened except when a judge was convicted of a criminal statute or some really unusual situation. I think right now the odds of Donald Trump thinking that he could ever impeach any of these judges and get a 2/3 vote in the Senate is impossible.
What if though? Yeah, but can I just push back here for a quick sec?
Sure.
I want to use Donald's own words, where he wants to destroy our tripartite system of government. He has said it himself. He wants to rewrite the Constitution. He wants to destroy the tripartite system of government. He wants to do away with the legislative branch, which he finds impeding his ability to operate. as well as the judiciary by impeaching, right? You bring up that you would need 2/3 of the Senate within which to do it. What if there is no Senate? What if there is no legislative body because he has already conferred all power from the legislative branch and the judiciary to himself? It's merely an executive order to do away with it. It is a self-proclaimed impeachment. Now, I know that this sounds dystopian, right? So did doing away with Roe versus Wade. Nobody thought we were going to see that. When you start talking about some of the things that Trump doing away with the First Amendment, right, as he did to me, where I was unconstitutionally remanded, not because Michael Cohen says so. You know it. You actually wrote a wonderful letter for me asking Biden to pardon me, right? But I'm talking about doing away with the First Amendment as he's talking now about illegal protests and sticking his nose in. Donald Trump's not playing games. That's what people have to understand. If he says he's going to do it, he may not get away with it, but he sure as hell's going to try.
I totally agree with that part of it. He's certainly tried. He has basically neutered the legislative branch by essentially bringing in Elon Musk with the threat of primarying every one of those Republican senators and Republican congressmen. That is a huge threat that has basically given Trump much more authority than he should have ever received. On the other hand, he doesn't have the same leverage with the judiciary branch. It's lifetime appointment. They're independent. That was the point that Justice Roberts was making yesterday. And even though, sure, they overruled Roe versus Wade, bad decision, it still went through the process. It's not like it was overruled by Donald Trump. He did appoint justices who went that direction. But the bottom line is the system is still in place. He has to deal with the system. I think that even that most recent decision where relating to monies that were owed by USAID, that there was a 5-4 decision. It was Roberts joining the three liberals plus Barrett. But I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see Donald Trump slap down on a couple of these cases where he is not going to be able to, for example, just destroy USAID because that was an organization created by Congress. It was Congress's right to do that. Donald Trump's only duty there is to faithfully execute that law, which he is not doing. So I think there's going to be, a lot of tension going on. There's going to be battles going back and forth. But I don't think he's going to be able to undermine the judicial branch the same way he has the legislative branch.
Well, let's hope, as they say, from your mouth to God's ears. I'm not as optimistic as you are. Meanwhile, I want to follow up and ask you, in light of Justice Roberts' rebuke, how do you think this is going to influence the Trump administration's approach to judicial decisions that they find unfavorable? I know he was on television a couple days ago talking to Laura Ingraham about this, whether or not that he would violate a court order. He was very quick to turn around to say, I've never violated a court order, right? Though I would have to argue to the contrary on that. But it was a great way to pivot away without really giving an answer. What do you think he would do here?
Well, it's obvious what he's already done. I mean, he's already violated the court order from Judge Boasberg. He was told that they could not move out any of the people that he wanted, the migrants that he wanted to deport to El Salvador. He was told that very clearly in a court order. And he was told that if the planes were in the air, he had to turn them around. And it looks like, based on the timeline, that at least 2 planes were in the air that could have been turned around, and that there was another one, a third plane, that was taking off after the order was entered. So he's trying to play cute, coming up with crazy arguments that, well, because the plane was over international waters, that therefore there was no violation of the court order. That's ridiculous. The court has jurisdiction over the individuals in the U.S. that are controlling those planes. The idea that it wasn't The order that appeared in the docket sheet wasn't exactly the same as the order that was said orally in court is also ridiculous. That's just trying to play on words. They're trying to come up with every ridiculous argument they can to say we're really not violating the court orders when in fact they were. And I think the important thing to remember here is, even though what he's saying is he was getting rid of criminals, people who had committed crimes that were dangerous members of a gang, the problem is, under our system of justice, you don't just put people in a black hole prison in El Salvador where you have no control over them, where God knows what's going to happen to them, without some kind of due process ahead of time to determine that, in fact, these people are criminals, that they are members of the gang. How do we know they are? How do we know they didn't just pick people up off the street and throw them into this big PR play that they made to spirit these people out of the country and put them in this El Salvador jail? I mean, this is, in and of itself, is un-American, is absolutely disgusting. And I hope that this judge digs into this deeply, finds out exactly who knew about the order, what the conversations were after he issued that order, and to really hold people responsible, take testimony, take names, and hold people in contempt.
Yeah, well, not to make things even worse, to throw salt into the wound, we're actually paying El Salvador, what, $6 million within which to house and to keep these individuals as inmates. So not only did they ignore the judge's verbal order, right? And by the way, if you listen to the Trump acolytes, if you listen to the enablers sitting there, well, the problem is that the judge, the order was from the bench. The order needs to be in writing so that we can ensure that we fulfill whatever the terms of that order is, right? And that there's no, why didn't the judge just take the transcription of his order and sign it? I mean, that's, this is where,
makes no
I
difference.
understand, but this is where Trump has this incredible superpower of fucking around, right? Of bullshitting and making the piece of sand that he finds into the entire beach. But the judge should have done that. I don't see why the judge just didn't immediately, especially knowing Trump's history of delays and fucking around with the system. Why not just turn around and have an automatic transcription?
There's no need to do that. There was no reason for him to do that. I've been practicing in the federal courts for over 50 years. I've done zillions of these temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. The judge issues an order from the bench. You follow that order. It doesn't have to be in writing. It's said to the attorneys. The attorneys are responsible for taking that order down precisely and conveying it to their clients. End of story. Someone can go to jail for violating that order. They can be held in contempt for violating that order. So, no, it really doesn't make a difference. It's really putting form over substance.
So let me ask you this then, because given the increasing tensions between the executive and the judicial branch, what safeguards are in place to maintain judicial independence?
Well, the safeguards are, one is a lifetime appointment. It's not like Wisconsin where people are running for the Supreme Court and they're taking positions on issues before they even decide on the issues. We have a totally different system in the federal system where we appoint. The president appoints judges and they have to be confirmed by the Senate. The other thing that's going to be restraining Trump is if he gets a good, quick kick in the butt from the Supreme Court on a number of these issues. It's going to be very hard for him to argue that any of the justices who wind up coming down against him, that somehow the system is rigged when he appointed some of these judges. It's going to make it very difficult to argue that. It was kind of like what happened in Watergate. It was a unanimous decision ordering Nixon to turn over the tapes. And the problem was some of those judges that actually were part of that decision were individuals that were appointed by Nixon. And the Republican senators knew it. Everybody knew it. And I don't think he had any choice. So there are these constraints out there. And certainly on some of these matters, it relates to spending money that Congress has allocated. I mean, his job is to enforce the laws, to faithfully execute the laws. To the extent he doesn't, there's just going to be more turmoil, more chaos, including our financial markets.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, because I think there was some number of like 250, give or take, of these members of the alleged members of this Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, right, that were sent off to, to El Salvador. Now that we have this fight that's going on between the executive and the judicial branch, the fight between President Trump and the attacks and the denigration on Judge Boasberg, how, or I should say, what legal precedents do you think that this case has now set for future deportation proceedings, if any?
Well, if there's any precedent here, it ought to be that they just don't do this in the middle of the night and that they give the opportunity for the courts to review it. Or the precedent could be that Trump is just going to keep on doing this. I mean, that's the big question. And so I think it's important that Boasberg turn up the Bunsen burner here, that he bring in people who are involved in this whole decision, that he take testimony, he hold a hearing to determine whether his order was violated. And if it was, then he ought to hold people responsible and hold them in contempt, and if need be, put them in jail for what they did. I mean, I think that's where this ought to go. And there ought to be a public hearing making it very clear that certain people knew about this and they went ahead anyway. And I think that kind of public pressure is important, and also the pressure of the court to force individuals in to testify about all this, because they're going to be testifying under penalty of perjury. And who's to say that if Trump isn't around, well, Trump's not going to be around 4 years, hopefully, that these people aren't putting themselves in harm's way by lying. And who's to say that the judge doesn't hold them in contempt?
Yeah, and nobody. But here's the thing. If we look at just like history, you remember my case, the one that my lawyer, Danya Perry, brought the habeas corpus petition, Michael
Absolutely.
Cohen versus Bill Barr et al., right, the DOJ and so on. I remember at the Second Circuit here in New York when we were appealing, as I was trying to file an action under Bivens against Bill Barr and the DOJ. They turned around and one of the questions that one of the 3-panel judge asked of government, what is to prevent government from doing this again? And government had no answer. You know what they said? Well, they could use Michael Cohen's decision by Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, federal court Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, as a way within which to undo the unconstitutional or the illegal remand of an individual back to prison because he refused to waive his First Amendment constitutional right. There was no way to stave off what government could end up doing should they so desire. And that's the concern that I see with this case. So far, there is no
your case was a little bit easier in the sense that you were imprisoned in the United States. The court had jurisdiction throughout over the facility that you were in. They could have issued an order to the facility, basically demanding
they
they released you, which they had to.
Or it took 16 days, though.
Would have wound up in the clamor themselves.
But it took 16 days.
Right.
Nick, but it took 16 days. I mean, trust me when I tell you, 16 additional days of solitary confinement, bringing it to a total of 51. It's not easy, nor should anybody have to go through that. That's really the question I'm asking you, right?
But the problem here is it's worse by putting people in a prison, basically a black hole in El Salvador, and not having any jurisdiction over that prison. That's
Right.
the problem, is that you can't send an order down to the prison in El Salvador and say, release these people. They have no jurisdiction over those prisons once the people are in El Salvador. That is the big difference with your situation.
Right. So then it's very dangerous. This is why I was asking about the future deportation proceedings. But how do you think that the judiciary then balances out? As we know, the Supreme Court gave Trump a carte blanche, right, in order to do whatever he wants, presidential immunity, so long that it's predicated upon national security concerns. So he now turns around and claims that these alleged gang members, this entire Tren de Aragua and everybody, they are all threats to our national security. How do you balance this national security concern with individual rights in these deportation cases, especially to those that are not even part of Tren de Aragua?
Well, even if you're balancing here, I mean, if they had them in prison, there was no reason why they couldn't have hearings to determine whether, in fact, they were members of this organized crime gang. I mean, that could have easily been done. That's all that anybody was asking for, was to have due process here. That easily could have been done. They purposely chose not to do it, to try and make themselves a bunch of tough guys and to show force, when in fact they could have picked up innocent people on the street and included them in these gangs just because they had certain tattoos or they had tattoos. I mean, we don't really know. We don't even know who these people were because there's no names other than the ones that were the plaintiffs in this case before Judge Boasberg. I mean, that is the issue here, is that there was no due process. It was totally up to this guy, Tom Homan, who was going to be picked up and who was going to be sent to El Salvador. And that's not the way our system works. We don't have a Gestapo. And that's what this is looking more and more like.
So let me ask you then what do you think that this judicial intervention in these deportation cases, what impact do you think that they'll have on the administration's broader immigration policy? This episode of Mea Culpa is brought to you by Graza, my new favorite olive oil. It's fresh, it's never blended, and it comes from a single type of olive, the Picual, straight out of Jaén, Spain, where over half of the world's olive oil is produced. So why Graza? Single origin goodness, that's why. Only one olive from one region. No mysterious blends. That means a traceable, a fresher product without mixing in any low grade or unknown oils. It's super fun. It has squeeze and spray bottles too, so there's no more messy tins or drippy spouts. Just aim, squeeze, and go. I mean, there are 3 types for any task that you have. One, they have something called frizzle. That's their newest, with a higher 490-degree Fahrenheit smoke point, which is perfect for frying, crisping, or grilling. Sizzle at 410 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an everyday cooking oil for roasting, marinating, and sauteing. Then they have something called drizzle, which is a bold, a punchy finishing oil that you sprinkle on your salads, you dip your bread in, or even you top it off on your ice cream. Look, let me be clear. My daughter is the actual chef in the house, and she uses olive oil on everything from pastas to preparing steak. I mean, not only does this cook well, it smells delicious. Plus, as a healthy eater, Graza's extra virgin oils, they are loaded with those heart and brain friendly polyphenols. So it's good for you. Look, so here's what you get. You get 10% off your first order on Graza's site. But I personally suggest grabbing the trio. That's all the 3 squeezy bottles, the sizzle, the frizzle, and the drizzle, so that you're set for every style of cooking. So head right now to graza.co and use code Cohen to get 10% off of Trio, which includes, again, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle, and get to cooking your next chef-quality meal. Again, head to Graza, graza.co, and use code Cohen, Cohen, to get 10% off the Trio. And I love saying it, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle. So get cooking now. they're not just looking at, again, MS-13 or, again, Tren de Aragua. They're looking to deport 10 million illegal migrants in this country. How do you think that this impacts the broader immigration policy?
Well, I think it is the broader immigration policy, unfortunately. Look at the medical doctor who was a teacher at in Rhode Island. I mean, she was at Brown University. She just went home to Lebanon and was coming back and was deported back, presumably because she just attended a funeral of somebody who was a Hamas, or not Hamas, but a Hezbollah leader, just for attending a funeral. Now, what evidence do they have of that? What does that all mean? No one's saying that she was a terrorist or that she was a member of Hezbollah. But that's the reason why you need hearings. I mean, this was ridiculous. This is a person who's a medical professor, was involved in a very rare, kind of unique niche area in medical practice where she's really needed in this country. And they just get her out because they decide themselves, well, she attended a funeral of a guy we didn't like. And that's why you need a hearing here. That case really deserves a lot more attention, which I hope it gets. It's not just what happened before Judge Boasberg, but it's also what happened in the Rhode Island court, where there was no hearing and no due process. And I don't think we've heard, the whole story on that one yet.
Yeah, it reminds me of that documentary movie with, I think, Jodie Foster called The Mauritanian. Something very similar happened where a guy was from Mauritania was sent to Guantanamo Bay simply because his brother was part of one of these nefarious organizations like a Hezbollah, and he had sent him money thinking he was sending him money for his family, right? And so they grabbed him here, they sent him off to Guantanamo, but he spent like 20 plus years there. I mean, it's a great documentary, and I certainly hope that doesn't happen to this professor, to this doctor from Brown University. But since we're talking upon violating people's rights, as I have at right this moment, I'm still the first political prisoner held by this country because I refuse to waive my First Amendment constitutional rights. We have another issue which is being thrown right in front of it, as if like what you and I had talked about so many times, online and offline, that I think Trump was using me, or his people, I should say, Bill Barr, the administration, were using me as like a litmus test. We have this Columbia University student. Now, I don't give a shit whether you like this kid, you hate him, whether you're pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. That's not the issue here. Not the issue at all. This kid, Mahmoud Khalil, a student, was detained for his participation in pro-Palestinian protests. Not about pro-Palestine, though, claiming that he is actually a Hamas infiltrator into this country. Now, his arrest has been criticized as a violation of First Amendment rights. And I totally agree. I think that there is not even a definition of what an illegal protest is. So my question to you is, how should the government navigate the line between national security and freedom of speech?
Well, again, this comes back to due process and having this guy have a hearing prior to any kind of deportation. I mean, obviously, they've come up with nothing linking him to any kind of terrorist organization. If they had that kind of evidence, they would have said so. And all they've done is taken a guy who is here on a permanent green card, fairly permanent anyway, who's married to an American citizen who's got a child on the way, and they're trying to deport him basically because he was involved in these protests at Columbia University. Again, this is a PR ploy trying to make a statement without really any kind of evidentiary backup to say that this guy did anything with respect to any kind of terrorist organization. Again, it's the same issue. I think
it is, yeah.
It's exactly the same issue. And again, it doesn't come down to, like you say, whether you like the the Venezuelan gangs, if the guy's a member of a Venezuelan gang, okay, that's fine. But the question is, were these people, all of them, members of a Venezuelan gang? Was the individual in Columbia University, was he part of Hezbollah or of Hamas? I mean, they've come up with no evidence on that. They've said nothing about it, all of which leads me to believe if they had to go to a hearing, they'd be out of luck, that they'd have nothing to say. So that's the issue. And I think that's what people have to keep hammering on these. We've really got three sets of these situations right now, all of which come down to the government trying to prohibit people from getting normal due process, which is the law under our statutes, under our Constitution.
Yeah, it's like, look, I'm very outspoken. I'm 100% in this case pro-Israel, though I would like to see a two-state solution. I think there has to be a solution somewhere down the line. But the real question that I ponder and that I've argued with so many people over, like real serious, ugly arguments where even if the speech is deemed supportive of designated terrorist organizations like Hamas, how does the law distinguish between free expression and actionable support? I can't figure it out in this case.
Well, I think it's pretty easy. I mean, the question is the government has to come forward with proof that there was a connection between this person and Hamas, or that he was somehow aiding Hamas. They don't have that proof. They're gone. I mean, that's it.
No, that's not my question, though, Nick. I'm not aiding Hamas. That's a clear, easy answer. I'm not making it so easy on you. I'm fortunate to have somebody like you here. So the question is, what if hypothetically Mahmoud Khalil, the student, was actually in support of whatever Hamas had done, and that he believes Hamas, this terrorist organization over there, is doing a good job and doing the right thing? That's free expression. My question is, how does our legal system distinguish between free expression? Like, you could, like Charles Manson. There are fucking people I've seen walking around with Charles Manson's face on a shirt, right? Free Manson. Charles Manson's a fucking murderer, right? Let's be clear about that. He's a despicable fucking human being, right? But you have a right in this country, the First Amendment, to free expression. So my question is, how does the law distinguish from that free expression to actionable support? He didn't support anything other than through his words.
You say actual support. You have to take actual action. This goes back to the Nazis, parading through Skokie, Illinois years ago.
Or through Charlottesville.
In Charlottesville, exactly. So people have the right to protest. They have the right to come out in favor of some ideas, as despicable as they might be. But the moment they take action, like they did in Charlottesville, where somebody ran over a protester, then you've crossed the line and you're going to be prosecuted for that. Just having the idea, no matter how horrible the idea is, in this country, you have the right, the First Amendment right, to express those views. It's just when you take it to action is when you cross the line.
Right. So let me then change what I was saying. What we know about this Columbia student is that he was expressing a position which is contrary to my position, to the president's position, to Israel. I totally get that. But what did he do? I have yet to be able to find any action that he took other than expressing by protest. I have yet to be able to find what action he took, what information, what documentation, what evidence do they have that he is aiding Hamas in some way against America and our national security interests. I'm just trying to find that because, again, I don't care. Everybody has the legal right to be the biggest asshole that they want. And I think every one of those people in Charlottesville, right, should have, under the same ideology as this Khalil case, they should then have all been arrested, and those who were not U.S. citizens should have been deported, walking down the street with tiki torches, screaming, "Jews will not replace us," right? Or the KKK or any of these other white supremacist groups. I find what they're saying to be despicable. But I hate to say it, in America, your First Amendment right is to say and to be the biggest asshole that you want to be.
I think that's right. It doesn't say that exactly in the First Amendment, but you pretty much summed up the law on this area. And that's the way it's been, forever, really. And you can bet your bottom dollar if they had any kind of evidence on this guy at Columbia that he was somehow involved in funding Hamas or funding any of these terrorist organizations, you would have heard about it by now, and it would have been all over the press. They would have been touting that, and they've failed to do it. And they know they can't do it in a hearing.
Right. But meanwhile, he's still incarcerated. Let me ask you this question then. What legal protections do students have when their ideology, when their activism conflicts with this administration's policies?
No, the protections they have is to have somebody run into court for them immediately and get a restraining order to keep them from being sent off to some other foreign country or to El Salvador. I mean, that's what happened with this Columbia student. What the administration did was they took him out of New York so they could get away from a New York judge and put him in Louisiana, where they probably think they've got a better shot with a Louisiana judge and a Fifth Circuit, which I'm not so sure they would. But I'm sure that was the thinking behind this. But I think what a student has to do who finds themselves in that bind is to be ready to have somebody immediately run into court to get a restraining order to keep them from being moved and to keep them from being sent overseas. That is the real issue. They did that in Boston, in Rhode Island with the professor at Brown University, but the administration ignored that order too. So that's one we're going to hear a lot about, I think, once more the facts come out on that situation.
What happens if you don't have money within which to hire a lawyer? Like I'm sure this young student doesn't have. I know he's like a graduate student. What if he doesn't have money to go in, find a defense attorney in order to defend your right, right? I mean, now you have to rely upon, think about it, you have to rely upon a lawyer or a law firm, one who is competent, in order to do it pro bono. We're already seeing Trump attacking like the 5 biggest law firms in the country who do a shitload of pro bono work simply because they represented or had in some capacity, represented Jack Smith in the investigation or one of the investigations against Trump.
Yeah, look, I guess you're raising kind of 2 issues there. One, what does a poor guy do like this fellow at Columbia? Well, I think the answer is there are pro bono organizations out there. In fact, many of these lawsuits are brought by organizations that are really just dedicated to fighting all of these issues in the courts. You've got over 120 cases right now pending in the federal courts against the Trump administration on a whole series of issues. This is not the only thing that's out there being fought, and it's being done by lawyers on a pro bono basis. So fortunately, there are a lot of lawyers that have stepped up to the challenge here and are actually helping out in these things and are prepared to do that. The second issue that you're raising really has to do what Trump is doing with respect to major law firms in this country, which is absolutely outrageous. He's trying to undermine their client base, trying to take business away from them if they have it with the government because of positions. And I think these law firms are all going to fight back. And I would very much believe that the judiciary is going to come down like a ton of bricks on the administration for doing any of this kind of attack on law firms just because of the clients that they've represented. So this is an issue that I think is going to get a lot bigger, and it's going to go up through the courts. And I think ultimately this is going to be an easy one for the Supreme Court, and it's not going to make Trump.
No, what we can do is hope, right? But meanwhile,
Exactly.
there's a case that's out there where the judge ruled that USAID workers were improperly terminated, citing violations of their rights. Let me ask you, what does this decision reveal about the legal protections for federal employees?
Well, I think the main takeaway from that decision with USAID has to do with the fact that Trump essentially encroached upon congressional powers. The statute that set up USAID back in 1961 during the Kennedy administration and subsequent amendments made it pretty clear that you couldn't reorganize USAID, you couldn't do anything to USAID unless, in fact, you got congressional approval to do that. Only Congress could do that. So what this judge found, I think the biggest finding here was that Trump violated his scope of power. He moved into the legislative branch and did something that he had no power to do. And I think this is one area where I think even the Supreme Court is going to knock him down. Brett Kavanaugh, who's one of his appointees, has a decision with D.C. Circuit when he was on the D.C. Circuit that essentially was very clear about dividing between what are Section 1 powers, that being Congress's powers, and those of the president, which are to faithfully execute the laws. So I think Trump is going to get his comeuppance on that one. Hopefully, it'll be in time to keep USAID mostly intact. The problem is that the courts can't act as fast as Trump can act. I mean, you go into court, you got to file briefs. There's a process. There's a number of days that go by where the other side gets an opportunity to respond. And unfortunately, the problem is that it's a matter of timing. And Trump was able to go into USAID with Musk and just completely trash the place.
Yeah.
As Musk said, he put the agency into the wood chipper, which he did in a matter of days. So the question is, can that be resurrected and can that be saved? Which is an extremely important agency, and people literally are dying because of removing that aid from various countries. It's really horrific.
But since we're talking about these cases and the ones that are brought by these big law firms, another federal judge actually, based upon again the opposition by one of these big firms, they recently blocked President Trump's policy banning transgender individuals from military service, ruling that it likely violates constitutional rights. I can ask the same question. What are the potential long-term impacts of this decision on, for example, we'll just use military personnel policies?
Well, I think, again, they're not going to do well in the courts on this issue. But what I find really despicable about this is they're taking a very small minority that really is powerless in a lot of ways and going after them just because they're different and because they can use it politically with their base to get them all riled up. Like everybody thinks, well, probably the whole military is overrun with transgender people, when in fact it's a small percentage. It's a small percentage in the military. There's hardly any of them in terms of athletes that are people born men that are competing as women. They're turning what is basically a molehill into a Himalayan mountain over nothing. And it's mean, it is despicable, and it's really just going after people who don't have the ability to defend themselves. And they're using it to try and make this into an issue that really is not an issue. Even the military has no problem with transgender people.
But by the way, you brought up something that was really something that I don't understand, right? Obviously, sports and transgenders in sports, right? So We're 45 days into this new administration, and things are more stressful than ever. Family, the job, life. Life. I mean, maybe you're in search of something to help you take charge of your life with full mental clarity. So enhance your march and embrace CBD with VIA to experience the powerful benefits of hemp without the high. Look, if you haven't tried them, you're seriously missing out. Whether you need to unwind, to refocus, or just boost your mood, VIA is here to enhance your everyday and night. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, VIA is changing the game in natural wellness, blending powerful, high-quality hemp-derived ingredients to deliver real, effect-driven benefits. So whether you're looking to sleep better, have better libido, improve your focus, recover, or simply relax, VIA has a tailored solution just for you. With products ranging from 0 to high cannabinoid levels, VIA lets you fully customize your experience to fit your needs. So whether you're looking to support your daily wellness routine, enhance your focus and clarity, or just unwind with deep relaxation, VIA has you covered. I mean, from their award-winning effect-forward gummies to their premium indoor-grown THCA flower and calming drops, every VIA product is thoughtfully crafted, made with organic, lab-tested hemp sourced from trusted, independent, American-owned farms. And the best part? VIA legally ships across the USA, discreet, direct to your door with no medical card required and backed by a worry-free guarantee. I mean, look, I've tried the THC-free gummies for sleep. And let me tell you, anyone who knows me knows that I've had sleep issues my entire life. I mean, these 4 a.m. wake-ups, they just don't cut it when you're my age. I mean, where has this product been my entire life? So let me share some real quick points about VIA. All right, first, it's an industry leader with over 500,000 customers served to date. 2, it's made in the USA, farmed and crafted with care in the United States. 3, award-winning service, experience their top-notch customer support. 4, the quality of the ingredients, sourced from the finest hemp for your peace of mind, plus lab-tested and certified. And 5th, affordable and accessible. These premium products will fit your budget. So not sure where to start? Take VIA's product finder quiz to get personalized recommendations tailored to your needs. I mean, it will take you less than 60 seconds to complete. So if you're 21 plus, treat yourself to 15% off and get a free gift with your first order using our exclusive code Cohen at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com. Plus, enjoy free shipping on orders over $100. And if you're new to VIA, get a free gift of your choice. And after you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. So please support our show and tell them that we sent you. Enhance your everyday with VIA. We saw this male who's now transitioned to a female, broke every record. I mean, but not even just broke it. I mean, decimated the existing, world's record by a woman by, I don't even know, by, it was like 10 minutes. It's in a swimming match. I mean, I get it. So I understand why people will say that it's unfair. Isn't there a solution to it? Right? I mean, I think that it's fair to figure out, okay, if this really troubles you, let's figure out a solution, to this. I have no issue with that at all, but I don't understand the concept of the military. We have to separate out military from sports. Trump was very careful in terms of during the joint session to Congress, the speech, where he showed this young lady who he claims was basically rendered mentally impaired or brain damaged as a result of being hit in the head with a spiked volleyball, right? That this altered her life. It was a transgender high school athlete. I don't believe this story at all. I would like if he would have turn around and told us where we could find this information on their own. I can't imagine a volleyball. I don't care if you put it into a cannon and shoot it at someone's head, that it actually cause brain damage to the extent that this young child did. I just don't see it. But I understand the sports issue. I don't get military.
Yeah,
Women,
no, I agree. There's a distinction there. Absolutely.
women are some of the greatest fighters that we have. They're some of the greatest, members of our service that we have. What the hell's the difference?
Well, from Trump's standpoint, it gives him an issue to try and scare people. Like the military is being taken over by transgender people, as if that's such a horrible thing. The fact of the matter is, it's an extremely small percentage. And the military has had no problem with incorporating those kinds of people into the military. It just isn't a problem. And he's trying to turn it into something to scare people. That's what he's doing.
So let me ask you this, because as we're beginning to come to the end of the hour, I really have just two more questions for you. With all of your vast knowledge of law, being involved in, obviously, Watergate yourself, what historical examples exist of executive defiance against judicial rulings that you're aware of? And what were the outcomes? What do we have to look forward to?
Well, you obviously had the famous case of Harry Truman trying to take over the steel industry, which the Supreme Court said he could not do during the Korean War. So there's precedent out there that makes a very clear distinction between what a president can do and what Congress can do. The problem is that a lot of people, including Trump himself, who really has no understanding of how government works, should work, the Constitution, believe that a president's all powerful, that a president can do all kinds of things. And that's just not true. I mean, the courts over the years have made it very clear when a president cannot encroach upon the powers of Congress and vice versa. So I think we're going to see a lot of activity, and it's going to increase over the next few months. And some of this stuff is definitely going to make it to the Supreme Court. And I think on a number of these issues, Donald Trump's going to have his comeuppance.
Yeah. So let me ask you this one final question here. So let's say President Trump and this current administration, let's go back to that topic of they refuse to comply with a court order. They just completely say, you know what? Bullshit. I'm the president of the United States. I'm the chief executive. I have presidential immunity from any of these actions as granted to me by the Supreme Court of the United States. I deem this to be one of national security. What constitutional mechanisms are available to enforce the judicial decision? Because now we will have a major battle between the executive branch and the judiciary. What ends up happening?
The mechanisms are what I mentioned before. I mean, the judiciary doesn't have its own army to go out and enforce things, but it can make people come in, can testify, can get marshals to serve subpoenas, have marshals bring in people. And even though Trump might be immune criminally from these things, and the Supreme Court has made that clear, the other people below him are not immune, and they're going to have to take their chances. They don't get the slide just because Trump might be immune from criminal prosecution. They can wind up being prosecuted. They could also wind up being disbarred based on actions that they take before the court. So there's a number of avenues that the courts can take to enforce this. And what lawyer in the Justice Department is going to want to put themselves in harm's way to the point where they can be disbarred based on carrying out Trump's orders? Look at how many lawyers wound up in the soup. Yeah.
Rudy Giuliani did
for doing that.
Right?
Yeah.
Rudy Colludi did. Many lawyers did. I'm talking more about, even assuming that, you get an indictment, the federal court turns around and they bring an action against you. Trump just pardon them. He'll just pardon them and say, don't even show up. Don't even show up. Tell the judge to kiss your ass in Macy's window. Don't show up. And you know what? You got your job still here, and if not, I'm going to put you in Tesla. I'm going to put you as a high-paying job over at SpaceX or some of the other companies that are kissing Trump's ass right now. Don't worry about your future. You'll do better tomorrow someplace else, but stay the course. It seems to me that he has all the cards in this specific
Well, not
game.
necessarily. I mean, the example you just gave me is the judge, if he orders somebody to show up in his courtroom, he doesn't show up. He issues a bench warrant, has the marshals go out and bring him in. If the guy gets up there and refuses to testify, he puts him in civil contempt. Trump can't pardon civil contempt. The guy stays in jail until such time as he testifies. I mean, that's the kind of power that the courts.
But he can always, but Nick, can't he just turn around and say, I take the fifth, even though he's got a pardon? He can just turn around and say, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know.
He can get up and lie, but he does that at his peril too. I mean, who's to say 3 years, 4 years from now, another administration comes in and he gets prosecuted for it?
Right.
I mean, sure, he could come in and just lie about it. But I think the judges have got to, pull all stops here. I mean, they've got powers they can use. They can bring people in. They can make them testify. And if they don't, they can be held in civil contempt. I mean, don't forget that immunity only applies to Trump. It doesn't apply to his underlings. And
right,
if they want to,
but his power, his power of the pardon applies to all federal matters. So as long as it's not a state matter, as for example here with the Alvin Bragg case, where he cannot be pardoned except by the governor. Well, again, I still think that Trump holds a stronger hand of cards, which I guarantee you some of these enablers and acolytes that are surrounding him are telling him.
Well, I think that's right. But don't forget, there's always a 5-year statute of limitations on federal crimes. And if somebody perjures themselves, they got to take their shot that, maybe a Republican or somebody that is sympathetic to Trump is not going to be around 5 years from now. So
right
I just think that the judges have got to do everything they can in their power to force this guy into abiding by the Constitution.
Nick Akerman, thank you for making us smarter. Thank you for joining me on Mea Culpa. Great to see you again, my friend.
Yep, same here. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.